Welcome to Beneath the Bible, where we're helping you dig deeper and uncover the world beneath the sacred book. In this series, we're going to look at the historical background of the Bible. We will look at the different periods of time historians and archaeologists use as they look at the ancient world, as well as a few important people and places along the way. We'll look at a few ways these historical overviews can help us see the Bible in its context. In this video, we are going to look at the time period called the Late Bronze Age.
The Late Bronze Age is the name archaeologists use to describe the history and culture of the ancient Near East from around 1550 BC to about 1200 BC. Historians use different terminology to refer to this time period in different regions in the Eastern Mediterranean. For example, in the Aegean, they call this the Late Helladic period, but it's really all the Late Bronze Age. When referring to the archaeology of land that is now Israel, this period is simply called the Late Bronze Age, or LB for short. This nomenclature comes from an old tripartite or three-age system for distinguishing ancient cultures. It was developed in Europe in the 19th century to describe museum collections. Items were made of stone, bronze, and iron, so the cultures which made them were in the stone, bronze, or iron ages. Just as a note, if we could redo this system, academics would probably want to change it. It was designed for European archaeology and only kind of works for them, but when it was translated to the Mediterranean, it works even less. Iron objects are found in the Bronze Age, and bronze continued to be used in the Iron Age. But when it was brought to the Mediterranean by European archaeologists who applied to the Near Eastern cultures and further refined it, as for the Bronze Age, there's the early, middle, and late Bronze Age. This last period can be further divided into sub-periods called the LB1 and LB2, and even a bit further into the LB2A and LB2B. These divisions roughly break down into century-long periods which have distinct cultural and political characteristics in the Eastern Mediterranean. To get an idea of the important players and events in the Late Bronze Age, we're going to take a tour on the Eastern Mediterranean and explore how these empires interacted with each other. The start of the Late Bronze Age is marked by the beginning of the Egyptian New Kingdom. Before this time, Asiatic kings ruled Lower Egypt, which is actually the northern part of Egypt. But under the pharaoh Ahmose, Egypt was reunited and the Hyksos kings were forced out of Egypt and back into the Levant. Ahmose is regarded as the founder of the 18th dynasty, which has some of the most famous Egyptian pharaohs. Hatshepsut, the woman who ruled as a man, Akhenaten, the man who tried to make Egypt monotheistic from a new capital at Amarna, and his son Tutankhamun, or King Tut, whose intact tomb was excavated in the early 20th century. Other less well-known names are also important during this period, like Thutmose III, who consolidated Egypt's empire in the Levant. That empire prospered even if it wasn't quite as large anymore under the 19th dynasty, particularly under Ramses II, or Ramses the Great, who ruled Egypt for over 60 years. Ramses ruled over a golden era in Egyptian society. Great building projects and monuments were built under his rule. He built a legacy for himself and Egypt. Part of that legacy included many children and grandchildren, at least 90 children alone, including his successor, Merneptah, whom we will discuss in a moment. Ramses was also a warrior who fought many campaigns northward into Syria to expand and maintain his empire. One noteworthy battle was at Kadesh in Syria, where Ramses fought the Hittite Empire. This battle concluded with a peace treaty, and we have both the Egyptian copy and the Hittite copy of this treaty. Next, let's talk about the Hittites. The Hittites were a people group who founded an empire centered on their capital at Hatshepsut, in what is now central Turkey. From their capital, they expanded their empire with conquests that included much of central Anatolia, northern Syria, and as far west as the Aegean coast. Their expansionist campaigns and policies led to conflict with the other great powers, like Egypt to the south. We also have Hittite records of conflicts with the kingdoms of Mitanni, a Hurrian kingdom based in central Syria to their east and south. The Hittite king Mursili I even led a campaign as far east as Babylon in modern-day Iraq and sacked the city. Hittite texts also mention tension to the west with a persistent enemy called Arzawa, which had assistance from land they called Ahiyawa, including conflict over a place called Wilusa. While there's much debate about what Ahiyawa is, most believe this is a reference to the Mycenaean world, either the entire cultural world or more probably either Mycenae, Pylos, or Thebes specifically. The Greek poet Homer calls these people the Achaeans, and they fought over Troy, or Ilium, which may be the same territory as the Wilusa from the Hittite texts. This brings us to the next major power of the Late Bronze Age, the Mycenaeans. Mycenaean is a cultural designation for the people who inhabited the lands around the Aegean Sea in the Late Bronze Age. On Like the Egyptians or the Hittites that were united empires, the Mycenaean world was one of city-states, which was only united by common culture and a similar political system. Like other Bronze Age societies, the Mycenaean world centered around the palaces of its cities, with commerce and politics all orbiting around the palace and the bureaucracy within it, though perhaps not to the same extent as it did in the Near East. From the records of these complex bureaucratic structures, we have archives and texts which we can still study today. In the case of the Mycenaeans, these are in a text called Linear B, written in an earlier form of Greek. The Hittites, Egyptians, and some Canaanite palaces also left their own caches of texts, all of which have proven invaluable to the study of the Late Bronze Age and its catastrophic end, which we'll talk about in our next video. Many of the writings we have from the Late Bronze Age are related to record keeping, usually of agricultural, craft goods, animals, and military goods for the palace. Keeping track of economic transactions was important and hard work for these palace-based trade systems because the economies of the Late Bronze Age were active and interconnected. This is one common thread which characterizes the entirety of the Late Bronze Age. Oil and fine ceramics from the Aegean moved around the Eastern Mediterranean, lumber was exported from Lebanon, and copper, an essential component in bronze, was mined and shipped from Cyprus. Such interconnections might mean that today we find a Canaanite tomb filled with bronze weapons, Aegean ceramics, Egyptian amulets, Syrian-style seals, and an assortment of local items as well. Places like Cyprus and the Canaanite city-states played a crucial role in this commercial activity. Cyprus, or Alatia as it was called in the Late Bronze Age, was a patchwork of commercial city-states which prospered through selling copper and other resources that they packaged in fine ceramics. Canaanite city-states likewise were commercially active. Cities like Unger on the north coast of Syria moved goods around the Eastern Mediterranean. These cities remained economically active despite often being subjected to the many wars with the surrounding empires, as well as general unrest which was prevalent outside the core imperial areas. This was certainly the case for the cities in the southern Levant. A cache of documents called the Amarna letters details the frequent turmoil that marked life in the Canaanite city-states. The cities in Canaan were all subject to Egypt, but they often fought amongst one another. In addition, groups of uprooted people called Apiru moved around the region, practicing general lawlessness.
Knowing the history of the Late Bronze Age can greatly enhance our understanding of the story of the Bible, the biblical text, and the history of the Bible. Perhaps most importantly, the Late Bronze Age is the historical context of the Exodus. Ramses III is associated with the Exodus, both in popular culture as the pharaoh during the Exodus, as well as to some extent in the book of Exodus as the namesake of one of the cities the Israelites built during their captivity. There is a lot to discuss about the issue of archaeology and the Exodus, which we don't have time to dive into here. But I do want to note that here at Beneath the Bible, we favor a mid-13th century date for an Exodus event during the reign of Ramses the Great. Whatever questions remain about the archaeology of the Exodus, it's also worth noting that during this period we find the first written record of Israel as a historical entity. It comes from a non-biblical source called the Merneptah Stela. A stela is a stone erected with an inscription, and these were used throughout the ancient world to commemorate important events during the reigns of various rulers. The Merneptah Stela dates to 1207 BC, and it's a record of the victories of Ramses the Great's son and successor, Merneptah. The stela primarily records Merneptah's victories over the Libyans to the west, but it ends with a hymn of praise, which describes in poetic form his victory over several important Canaanite cities, along with the people he calls Israel. And most interpretations of this hymn of victory recognize this as the Israel of the Bible, and that, given the structure of the poem, Merneptah encountered Israel in the highlands of what is now Israel or Jordan. This record demonstrates that both the biblical story and contemporary records recall the final years of the Late Bronze Age as the years when Israel emerged as a distinct people. Other Egyptian records from this period are also important for our understanding of the Bible. For example, the Treaty of Ramses and Hatshepsut III is an outstanding example of ancient Near Eastern covenant. The form of the treaty provides an important template for understanding covenants in the Near Eastern world, including the covenants that appear in the Bible. And we'll be talking more about the ancient Near Eastern context of biblical covenants in a future video. Finally, this period is important archaeologically for understanding the world of the Bible, because the Canaanite culture as it existed in the Late Bronze Age is the material forebear of the Israelite material culture. Now that's to say, when the Israelites appear archaeologically, they continue a lot of the cultural traditions of the Bronze Age Canaanites. Knowing about the Canaanite culture of the late Bronze Age is informative for understanding the Israelite world in the Bible in the Iron Age, which follows. Now again, we'll explore this topic more in a future video, so be sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it when we publish them. Thanks for joining us for this Beneath the Bible video. If you are interested in learning more about this topic, we've included some references and resources in the description below. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like it, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our website, BeneaththeBible.com. If you learned something new today, take a minute to share this video with your friends, and until next time, keep digging.